Hi, everybody. I'm Annie Ryan, and I am a director and kind of sometimes an actor and a teacher, and I founded the Corn Exchange.
The piece I'm going to start on is the sometimes an actor piece because I just discovered I didn't realize at all that you were in Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Oh, yeah, it's so funny. I was just teaching recently enough, and one of my students, it was online, so I didn't really know them, and one of them said, like on day one, said Ferris Bueller, and I was so like, yeah, but yes, I did. We shot for half a day on my 16th birthday, which is a really beautiful
Mm.
little record to have, of yourself at 16. Yeah, Ferris Bueller.
Yeah, I mean, what a thing to have on your CV. You know,
I know, right?
bank
I know. And they put me in the trailer a couple of times, so it looked like I had the lead, which was
deadly.
really cool. Yeah.
I mean, let me go back
Yeah.
and even before that, do you think you were destined to be doing what you were doing like from a childhood? Do you think were you performative? Were you
I don't know. I mean, what is it like? I don't know if I believe in destiny, or I really would love to believe in destiny, but I really can't. Was I destined? My parents were both in religious orders. They were both teachers. So my mother was a nun for 13 years, and my father was in the De La Salle Brothers. So she was really high church. Like the highest you could get of the nuns was Sacred Heart Club, so I've been told. And then he was really low church, and she let that, that was a big deal for her. So I don't know, life unlived.
mm,
She definitely encouraged us to play. And look, we're Americans, so like and they were American, like Irish Americans, but in America. So
yeah,
it didn't have quite the same insanity as the church here, or the same insanity, but just a different flavor of it
yeah,
over there. So it wasn't all powerful in the same way.
yeah.
Having said that, my mother was very keen to let us just. She's so funny. She says, "Oh, I never cleaned the house. We just played and played and played." And my sister went into ballet, and I went into acting. Um, I mean, probably like the fact that we weren't particularly academically gifted, or I wasn't anyway. Um, that probably had a lot to do with it
But you
too.
went in, was it quite young you kind of started acting, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, maybe it came out of actually growing up I mean, partly it was very much her encouragement to kind of do whatever you feel you want to do.
Mm.
Great American way, and then, we grew up in a very conservative suburb of Chicago, really white, like hardly any Jews even,
Mm.
almost everybody was like the kind of grandchild of an immigrant from Europe. So, it was like the Kleins and the Panucci's and the Petersons lived next door, So it was like this, really lily white suburb. And we had a mock election in the 80s between Carter and Reagan. And the only kids in the whole school who voted for Carter were me and a boy called Gabor Hegewitz I think his parents were from Hungary. And he's turned out to be, I know from Facebook, like a complete Trump supporter. So I might be the only like liberal. We were like maybe the only liberal family in the whole suburb. And people used to say to my sister, "Where are you from?" She was like, "I'm from here." But, we were other. They were also damn fucking tall. Like all these tall, my best friend, Chrissy Peterson, was like 3 heads taller than me and tan and blonde. I had glasses. She had perfect eyes. She had buck teeth. I had fine teeth. Like it was just, you know, but we definitely did feel a bit other, I think. And that and the kind of creative play in the house drove us toward the city, if you like. And it was actually my godfather was an actor, and he was in the Brothers with my dad, and he became an actor. And I think his big claim to fame was this big, long-running show that ran for like years or something, which was "Do Black Patent Leather Shoes Really Reflect Up?" That was the name of the show, and he played the priest, and it was like good old Irish Catholic, like American Irish Catholic you know, the nuns and
What a
anyway,
brilliant title.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's
So, so anyway, he turned my mother on to a little workshop that was right on the north, just beyond the north side of Chicago, in Evanston, called the Piven Theater Workshop. And so I joined at the age of 12. And Shira Piven was my teacher, and I'm still friends with her. And it's still the work I teach, actually. I went after that to NYU because I was very serious about my acting. And but actually, the work that I really valued was really from Joyce Piven.
and did you feel that kind of when you went there at 12? Did you feel like was something kind of immediate for you that you kind of found something?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, this was like, and the work is very physical. It's not really dance, but it's really embodied ensemble-based improvisation, and everybody was so exotic, and they were all in like, I don't know, someone had just been to Europe and someone else had come back from India, and they were all covered in like Mexican jewelry, and
Yeah.
they were also all tall and leggy and blonde, by the way, as far as I remember, apart from the Cusack family, who are the other Cusack family, who are John Cusack, Joan Cusack, and Cusack. So they were all part of this outfit. And actually, weird, like their mother was, I think their mother, Nancy, was a nun as well. But their parents had the same names as my parents. And their first two kids were Anne and Joan, like me and my sister. Really weird. But they went to 5 kids instead of 2. But anyhow, yeah. So apart from the lily white, freckledy Irish people, they were all like so exotic and beautiful and so expressive, and I felt looking at them like, oh yeah, this is for me. But really, it was the connectivity with the work, and particularly the movement, and being inside of those games. Uh, Very, very freeing. And the whole teaching is really about coming out of the head and into the body and into the moment of play,
And it's
which is
interesting
totally
because
what I
did
teach.
you then through high school were you kind of was there outlets for that in school or was it purely in the workshop? Like was there
I really just went to the workshop. It was like it was like DYT, but with a very particular training and a real intensity in the training.
hmm,
Um, as opposed to kind of having a big eclectic mix, which youth theatre here would have of everyone coming in to teach. This had a very particular aesthetic and a particular technique, and it came from kind of Uta Hagen and the theatre games out of the very beginnings of Chicago improvisation in the 1950s. Joyce and Bern Piven were part of this little theatre company, along with people like Mike Nichols, who became a really famous film director. He did The Graduate and whatever, loads of other things. And Ed Asner, who played Lou Grant on the Mary Tyler Moore Show. Anyway, all these people. And also the founders of Second City.
yeah.
So it was the sort of birth of improvisation in Chicago. And whereas most of Chicago went to the Second City route and then eventually to Saturday Night Live, my teachers were kind of like suffering Jews, from Russia genetically. And so it was Chekhov for them. And
Okay.
so we did loads of Chekhov short stories and Yeats and fairy tales, literary tales, and scene work, Shepherd and a lot of Mamet.
Okay. And was there
So
was kind of at that young age then there was that kind of clash of not clash but that kind of literary and the physical was kind of there very
yeah,
early for you. And were you reading a lot? Were you kind of were you interested in the canon or interested in film or what was kind of
yeah. I mean, yes, but mainly through that, I think. I mean, I was drawn, if it wasn't for that in the house on my own or whatever, I was drawn more to poetry and to photography books and to art. And my mother had studied history of art and art as a nun in New York City until they thought she was too talented and said, "You are now doing theology." So I don't know what would have happened there, but if she had pursued it. But so I was always drawn to the image and drawn to language and a kind of poetry rather than novels. I think I don't really think I'm dyslexic, but definitely you know, I've never been tested, but there was a difficulty in staying with the page that in a funny way, I think served me as a director, in that oftentimes, you know, it's kind of, I thought for years I was just a bit stupid, but actually I thought, no, this is a different kind of intelligence. But there were things on the page that I wouldn't quite get until I heard it in the space. And so as a director, I would kind of use that stupidity, if you like, in that if I figured, well, if I'm not getting it, they're not going to get it. And so I have to make sure that I'm getting it, that the dots are aligning. And I remember Joyce Piven, my teacher, she was so funny, you know, she used to say, you know, if you're not connected to the material, we don't receive it. And I think that's true, you know. We don't go to the theater or engage with acting on screen for information, or if we go for the sense of presence, we go for that kind of weird channel that a performer is, and all the team as well, for the kind of materials, like the germ in that material, to reach us through all of this technical expertise, you know.
That's brilliant.
Going on, but
Oh, sorry, I'm going to pause you there. That's yeah, you have me. That's brilliant. And I'm interested in that young woman kind of in relation to, because obviously, you know, as I said at the beginning, you know, first beauty you did when you were 16, so you were also kind of auditioning for things around.
Yeah, I mean, what happened was the movies came to Chicago, and around that time, and it was a big onslaught of teenage films. John Hughes actually went to the high school my dad taught in, and so when 16 Candles came around, I think that was his first big one. John and Joan Cusack were both in it, so that created, it wasn't just John Hughes, it was a number of filmmakers who came to Chicago. But actually, the film industry would be coming to Chicago anyway, because Chicago had a reputation for having really good actors. And between, well, the Piven School, but also Steppenwolf had a kind of training program. But the Chicago way, and, you know, Malkovich and Joan Allen and these amazing actors that have come out of Steppenwolf, the tradition in Chicago would be more immediate and less about the kind of intensity of the method acting school of New York, which was way more ego driven. And I mean, like, what I mean by that is like the focus on your own ego, yeah, and where your own emotional hangups are. And, you know, I mean, I went to NYU and got a big earful of it myself. So, and came out of there thinking that is not the way that interests me to go. And of course you need a little bit of that connectivity, but there's something, I think, much more rich in the bigger imagination than, you know, there's a lot of training that goes into very deep personal past work, where you kind of think of your mother's kitchen, you know, and these kind of method acting teachers. And, you know, I had a pretty crazy one at NYU who would like threaten to burn you with a cigarette in the days where you could smoke in the studio, yeah, you know. And they had all these 18-year-olds only just dying to have an emotional breakthrough, you know, like if you could come to tears in class, that was like really, you know, some kind of great triumph. So yes, you can terrify people into the moment for sure. It does work. But what interested me was the craft of embodying the imaginative spirit of the piece. That sounds so fucking hippy dippy, but no. But you know, and that could be something really, you know, naturalistic or gritty, like, you know, Sam Shepard's work, say. Not that all of his work is naturalistic, but still, like, yeah, in the dirt, you know. And Chicago would have a real working class kind of vibe as well. So Hollywood would have been going there anyway, and then all of us could improvise. So we were, you know, and so we were all seen for stuff. So it wasn't a great mystery that I ended up in Ferris Bueller at all. Like, so were half of the other kids from Piven, you know.
I suppose the journey to NYU and the journey in some ways to Commedia around that time. It was still in Chicago, that kind of the...
Well, NYU, so I'd started my little movie career, and it was, you know, like I did 3 feature films. I was the lead of the last one, you know, like hardly anyone saw it, but never mind. Like I was like could have really done that thing and was on my way, if you like. But I was very serious about being trained properly, and I had this idea in my head that I somehow wasn't. That the Pivens work was, I wanted more rigor in the training, and my dad, my parents really wanted me to get an education, so I thought I'll go to NYU, and actually it was the only place I even applied for. I was so dogged, and my mother, who's great, she's so aspirational. She's like, would you not think about Yale? And it's sort of amazing. I didn't think for a second I'd get into Yale. But actually, it was all through auditioning anyway. So I might have gotten into Yale, because I certainly wouldn't have gotten in from my grades. But I mean, my grades were fine, but it wasn't where my attention was.
Yeah.
But at that stage, I had already had, all this professional work under my belt, as well as I had done the Tempest at the Goodman with Bob Falls in his first season.
Wow.
At the age of 17.
Wow.
So yeah, but I mean, look, it was wow, but also it's one of those review quotes I'll never forget, which was something like, Anne Ryan is young, to be sure, and she was also woefully inadequate at sounding the music of her text. Now, I wasn't the only target in his this guy's review, but anyway, famous grump of but I remember it all these years later. In those days, I guess, and this is something that I think I want to talk about later. We were talking about, like, how do we address ourselves now in this changing world? But the great gift of youth, of course, is ignorance, and that the truth of potential, the truth that actually, well, I was well on my way. Like, I really could have followed Winona Ryder and John Cusack and all those people out to LA. Like, that door was absolutely open for me, and everybody was going. Everyone was kind of emigrating from Chicago. You kind of go, a lot of people stay, but you go to New York or LA. It's sort of, there is like an emigration issue there, which I don't think people ever talk about. Whereas here, when I came, it was all talk about, emigration was a huge topic, obviously. But anyway,
Annie, sorry,
yeah.
Stop you there for a second. I mean, that moment in time, though, I mean, as you say, obviously we've got lots to talk about later on when we're talking about, Corn Exchange and that work. But I mean, just to hold there for a second, that's a big transition or life transition to kind of do, to kind of hit the ground running, to get movies, to see things moving, and to see your peers kind of, heading out to the West Coast, and then you're kind of going, no, I want to get trained. That's a kind of very mature decision in a way.
Yeah, well, I guess I had a lot of ambition, and I had a lot of belief in myself. I had a lot of belief in my talent, and I was getting, partly because I was getting the roles, and I was really well trained in the sense that I knew what to do when I had a script, but I wanted more of that.
Yeah.
And I wanted a kind of excellence piece, which really NYU did not give me. Like, I was deeply disappointed with how it was set up and how there was just no quality control, really. They just admitted so many people to the classes, and they had no, I'm sure Yale is much better, but I mean, the Lear it was actually teaching the Lear that I realized how terrible NYU was. I kind of knew, but being a teacher with the Lear occasionally, it's incredible, because the only thing you can really give an actor is your attention. That's it, just your attention and a little bit of guidance. But you're watching, and everyone who trains at the Lear, you've got this staff of amazing talent, and they're all talking about you. They're all, talking about this kid's alignment and the voice and their maturity and I mean, that level of attention on an actor's whole being is, I mean, amazing. So anyway,
so what was in NYU? You found out like that method driven, or not that it all was, but that kind of method driven stuff wasn't for you. So how did you sneak out the other then?
Well, what happened was I went back to Chicago in the summers, and in 1988, Johnny Cusack came back from LA with The Style. So he had been sort of messing around in LA with Tim Robbins. Here's where I get like so name droppy. So sorry, everybody. But anyway, so Tim Robbins had a company out there. I think it's still going, called Actors Gang. And they got the commedia style from an actor called Georges Bigot. I found this out much later, and I was so relieved to hear that it wasn't just a bunch of beer-swigging guys who made this up from LA or whatever. Anyway, he was an actor from Ariane Minushkin's company, Théâtre du Soleil, and he had sort of stayed in LA. They went on tour and he stayed. And he was teaching this extraordinary commedia style, which they were teaching not in a full leather mask, but in makeup and with this wildness. And that really suited these boys, right? So I don't know if you guys, your listeners will have seen something of Jeremy Cusack saying, or Jeremy Piven in something like Entourage, right? So this kind of visceral energy he brings to that work is completely from the style. So this is the Piven's kid, Jeremy.
Okay.
So my teacher's son, who's a little older than me, who at the time felt much older than me. They were like 23 when I was 19 or whatever. But anyway, so they had taken this style and they really loved it, and they saw it as a sort of fuck you to George Bush the first, and to that whole conservative American political animal. So they came to Chicago with this extraordinary work, and they had at their fingertips a huge, a big posse of people who were already really good improvisers. They were already, because of Jeremy's parents who trained everybody. So we already could improvise. We were good mime artists. We were practiced, is what I should say, rather than good. We were just practiced improvisers and hungry for it. So they came and set up New Crime. And they did their first show in 1988, which I saw because I'm a little younger. So I was like, oh, and it blew my head off. It was a show called Alakazam, After the Dog Wars, that Tim Robbins wrote. And it was all set in a kind of freak show in the future, or in the past future. I don't know. It was like a Kurt Vonnegut kind of trip. And I remember Shira Piven was in it, and she was playing the perpetually pregnant lady who had this huge bump and gave birth to a television at the end. And a couple of other people were playing like the twin pinheads, and then the bearded lady. And there was this kind of China doll who never spoke. And then Johnny Storm or something was this kind of deaf mute who through love could then begin his voice. He could sing, and then the dream shattered and he couldn't speak again. And anyway, it was this kind of total car crash of a show, I'm sure. But I saw it like a whole bunch of times, and I would like go up to John afterwards, and who I didn't really know, because again, like I was starting in the workshop. I'm like the generation slightly younger. So they would have been out of high school already when I joined. But nevertheless, some friends of mine were in it. He's super tall, like he's like 6'4". So I would be like, and his huge big brown eyes like blooming down at you. Very compelling individual. But I was like, I want to be in your company or whatever. So then, and I wasn't alone. There were a bunch of us who were enamored of the work that way. And so that summer we joined the company. And what he did was he rented out like a storefront, like of a carpet store. And I guess it was like in operation, the store. I don't know. But anyway, we went in after hours at 6, and we had all of our commedia costumes and stuff at the back, and we would, from 6 to 7 get up into image, and he had this kind of like little makeshift stage with parachute fabric, and he had a band, a drummer, and maybe some guitarists turn up, and then he would chair, which is all the lingo coming, but he would be the chair, the director of the evening session, and we would all get up in the mad commedia gear and play until 9 o'clock and then go drinking. It was awesome. And then they decided on a show, and they made a show out of it. But the way they did it was that rather than just cast the company, everyone had to compete for the role. So you might have, like, say they were doing Streetcar, you'd have like all the different guys in the company playing Stanley. And then the ethos was steal everything, steal from the best. You see an image you like, you fucking steal it the next day. So they had this like hardcore, full on competitive like you can't imagine a more masculine environment, with acting. It was really hard to be a girl in this environment, let me tell you. And actually at one stage I remember they weren't nice to me or anything. Like I just really wanted to be there, and I really wanted them to like me and like my work and stuff. And they basically just ignored me. And one stage I remember I'd come up with an image for a dottore. So would be the doctor character, which basically translates as someone who's obsessed with their work. And I know from years and years and years of playing with this style that could mean anyone from like the little nerdy spelling bee competition 12-year-old who just are, with the glasses and the tape or whatever, to an artist who's obsessed with their work, to a dental technician. Could be anyone who's obsessed with their work. Okay, so that's the stock character. And I would come up with an image for a scientist, and I went up to John and went, "Is this okay?" And he went, "Oh, a woman can't play dottore." And I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, okay, I guess you're right." And it's so funny, like it really, every woman our age would have loads of stories like that where they were just shut down because of their gender. And of course, he would never even remember saying that, I'm sure, and to be honest, it was probably a rejection, not of the idea, but of the sort of desperate person coming up going, "Am I okay in this?" Which I recognize as a teacher. If someone and I say it to my students now, if you're coming up to me going, "Is this all right?" The answer is only no, because you're only offering your desperation. You're not, you can't see the idea. You've got to inhabit the idea and then check to see, but if you go, "Okay, she's like this," if I'd gone, "Okay, she's from that," if I just played her, it would have been fine. Yeah. But anyway, great life lessons.
What's the years, like how many years were you kind of involved with that company?
So I guess I went to NYU at 17, off to New York in 1987. And so I found the Commedia in 1988. And I was also teaching at the workshop, at the Pivens workshop. So I was teaching the teenagers in their summer institute. And then I was doing the Commedia at night, this kind of thing. So it was very much, it wasn't unlike what it used to be like for our generation back in the day, where you'd have the same posse of people would be doing whatever workshops, and we were all mixed up with each other. So it was kind of this big group of people who were teaching at the workshop, ex-Piven Theatre Workshop people, really, and picking up a few other people along the way. And then mixing up with the guys at Steppenwolf and, the kind of Chicago theater scene, really. Yeah. And so this was during my whole college experience. And then in 1989 was my third year. And that's when I came to Trinity. Okay. Because I was so disgusted with NYU. I really wanted a little education. And they really just take your money. And like, all you need to do is walk around Lower Manhattan and just have a look at all the buildings that say NYU on them. And you go, right, okay. Like it's just a money machine as far as I can see. I'm sure they have very good, their law school is apparently excellent. But undergrad drama was a joke. It really was. At least my experience was not. There was no discernment, not really good quality. But anyway, so I was hungry for myself. So I sort of made NYU. I kind of can't believe I was this person. I'm like, where is she now? But I made NYU allow me to go to Dublin. And I was either going to go to Florence or Dublin. So I could be in Italy now, Mark, Jesus. I could be in LA, all the lives unlived, I could be in LA, I could be in Italy. Anyway, so I came here and then I just joined Players, and I was, when I think of myself now coming into Dublin in the late 80s, okay, the last year of the 80s, but the 80s, where, like the shame, and I used to look at women walking around with their, concave chest going, what's going on here? And I missed all the poverty bit. Like I have my Kilchima cousins, in Mayo, but they, and loved going to visit them and everything. But so I had that little familial connection. But I was this like completely confident, fully trained professional actor rocking up going, "Hey guys, what's going on?" And in those days in Players, we had the two Dominics, Dominic Garrity and Dominic West, who's of course Dominic West. And, you know, they were just, I think they were in first year when I arrived, and they were, or maybe in second year, they were in second year, I think. And Michael West was sharing his rooms with Lenny Abrahamson. And they were totally insufferable snobs from what I remember, but like really cool. Like all of us a bit younger were going, yeah, they were like really like, you know, and they used to swan around talking about all these things. So it was just this Trinity world, but I didn't have to suffer, you know, and I shadowed Lenny on Normal People, and my own son did the Leaving Cert last year. So I'm like, you know, the gradual awareness through my adult life of like the strangeness of Ireland and the sort of depth of repression and the depths of like, you know, the intensity of the Leaving Cert. Like I didn't have to do any of that. I just rocked up having auditioned for NYU and gone like, boom, hiya, this is like, you know, and I was already teaching Commedia even then. So I met Conor Linehan. We did a little mini workshop even. This is in 1989. I mean, it's so long ago. And he played piano just like he did for Dublin by Lamplight. And I kind of taught a makeshift version of the style. So yeah. I don't know. And I just loved Dublin so much. I loved that everybody here were interested in ideas. And look, I loved the Chicago scene too. I did, but there was no intellectual rigor there. And even though I wasn't a big brainiac like Lenny and Michael, you know, I still was really impressed by it. And I was, I think, really afraid of the industry as well. I had my Me Too experience by then at the Goodman, by the way. So playing the Tempest, there was this whole other story going on. But I don't know, I'll stop there with that story. But and, you know, I had heard crazy stories from actresses who were already really doing very well, who were to become super famous, but people who I'd worked with as a really young one who had terrible stories about people I knew in the industry and being taken advantage of. So I kind of, it wasn't that I knew, I wanted to feel empowered in my work, and I wanted to feel like yeah, I wanted to do what I wanted to do and not to feel beholden. And the kind of last straw thing for me was really in 1992, I think, yeah, it was after I did my year in Trinity. I came back, I finished NYU, I like graduated, and I was back in Chicago doing New Crime, doing the Commedia and teaching at the workshop and like starting my career as an American actor, I suppose. And like I got a little bit more respect within the New Crime company. Like, you know, I was a slightly more valued member of the company, although it was very much a boys' club in a way. We were doing Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, and I played about 9 characters. Everybody played about 9 characters, and it was wild. But at that time, oh balls, I've completely lost my train of thought now. Where am I going with this story? Oh yeah, so I was doing my actress thing, and I was being called to audition. And in those days, this was like the beginning of putting yourself on tape, kind of, and that you would go downtown into a casting agency, and they would film you, and they'd send the videotape to LA. So this wasn't meeting the director. This was like being put on tape. Yeah. So fine, not as exciting as being the director, but grand. But the audition was for the film Dracula, and it was starring Winona Ryder, who I had done a film with at like, she was like 12 and I was 14, like our first movie was together. So I knew her, and we looked a lot alike then. I had the same little short haircut as she did. And I thought, they're not going to cast me. I look just like her. I look too much like her. And anyway, it was for the role of Lucy. But the audition was to have an orgasm on a tombstone. And I was like, no, I'm not doing this. And I had already done my kind of, at NYU, I got into kind of postmodern feminism and, you know, studied all the kind of like performance studies things of like the underground New York scene. And I wasn't really part of that scene, but at the same time I knew about, you know, the big kind of Wooster Group, and I just didn't want any part of that Hollywood thing. It freaked the shit out of me. Yeah. And I didn't want to be exploited, even though I liked having sex with all my friends. So it wasn't that I was a total prude. But it was more that that I didn't want to just, and also I didn't feel castable. I think this was the main thing. I was getting seen for roles that were like the friend of the lead, not the lead. I thought I wasn't beautiful enough to be the lead. I'm not leggy enough, whatever. I don't look like the lead. And actually, I probably could have played the lead when I think of it back really, like, you know, probably could have, but I didn't quite have the confidence for it. And I'm really not very funny. So I'm not I was like, and I'm not funny. So I'll just, if I go out there, if I follow John Cusack out to LA like everybody else, I'm just going to end up playing like, you know, and I'm sure this would have happened. I would have been like on ER. I would have been like a great little trainee doctor on ER or something. I probably would have been, you know, like Monica's little cousin on Friends for like 2 episodes or something like that. Like these kind of like, you know, I would have been on like Murphy Brown or something for, you know, I didn't see a career there, or at least a career that was empowered. And I knew Dublin, and I was so turned on by Michael and Lenny and their Three Joes project, which I was listening to in the year that I was here in 1990. And we had made a piece, Scene Around 6, which actually had, Dominic was in it. And so was Stephen Rennicks, who's the composer for all of Lenny's films, which is the funniest thing ever. If you ever get to meet Stephen, the idea that he was like performing theater games, like, you know, basically I taught the games, and it was all totally physical, where we were like pretending we were bugs, and then we would like transform into cars and have a car crash and transform into, it was just mental. But we were taking it very seriously. So it didn't occur to me that I would ever be a maker of work. It never thought I would write, or the idea of directing wasn't on the cards, but I was already teaching and totally passionate about the sort of ethos of the work, the technique of the work, and the kind of the rules, you know, yeah, liked the rules.
I think there's, like, as you move on into the formation, say, of Corn Exchange and that type of work, I think it's kind of, because when you came to Dublin, you know, like we're of similar kind of eras, there was a huge change happening in the Irish theatre landscape around that time as well. And then, you know, you rocked in,
yeah,
and the sense of that, you know, the canon being hit with this kind of, you know, commedia-esque physical story making juggernaut, and this amazing new kind of hybrid thing emerging. I mean, that,
yeah, it was really a thing. I mean, like, because I knew, I was so turned on by, and actually Michael had come to, we weren't together at that stage, we were just pals. But he was in New York in my last year at NYU, and kind of pretending to live in New York for a while, I don't know. And then he moved back, and then I came over for 1 month in June, and it was when the Dominics were graduating, and 1992. And it was beautiful every single day. It was like this every single day, and then we somehow were invited to Vivian Guinness's 40th birthday party, and then Michael invited us to his uncle's amazing place down in Cork, and I was like, Ireland, it's amazing. I was like, I'm definitely like, forget Chicago. I'm coming here. And Michael said, you know, it's not always this nice. Like, Ireland could be very dark. I was like, yeah, whatever. So I was like, this image of like the best of Ireland. And then, but I very much moved over with a vision, because I knew it well enough to know that the literary, or the theatrical style was totally literary. I was amazed watching plays that you would watch a play and never see anyone move their arms for like an entire show. I couldn't believe it. And so I knew I had something to offer. So when I came, I stupidly thought I would have an acting career in Dublin. Okay, so I didn't really think I was moving over to have a theater company, although I was reported by my friend at somebody's like pre-wedding thing to do the game of where will you be in 5 years? And I said, I think I'll be in Ireland, I'll have my own theater company, and I'll be married to Michael West.
wow.
I did predict that, frighteningly enough. But I knew that I could do something, like, whereas in Chicago there were lots of people who could teach improvisation. There were much better improvisers than me, much funnier people. There were more beautiful people. I just felt like people who really wanted that Hollywood life. I was super ambitious, but not, and I completely imagined, you know, that I would kind of gain this kind of international notoriety somehow. Where is my international career? I remember Ruth Nega looking in her bag for like, where's my international career? Where is it? But anyway, it has not happened yet. But yes, yeah. But anyhow, so but I felt I could serve. I think that was the key thing, that I had something to bring. And so in '93, that was when Michael Murphy arrived home from Paris, having been to the Coq, and he set up a little 3-week. Were you part of this, Mark? Were you part of that group?
No.
Okay, so 1993, there was he rented out the St. Andrew's Resource Center on Pierce Street for 3 weeks, and he invited me to teach Commedia and the games. And he had Michael teach sort of Michael's own weird version of the whatever games he teaches, and he had Michelle Reed do mask work, and Cindy Cummings do contact improvisation, and he was doing clown, and Veronica and Raymond were there, and it was the beginnings of Barabbas. So it was like a workshop to kind of kickstart Barabbas. But other people turned up, like Andrew Bennett turned up, and that was the beginning of our big love affair with him. I remember Dinny Conway was there, and it was really, I think it was the first time that I taught the style, and I, you know, continued from there. So it was sort of amalgamating with the beginnings of Bedrock, and then, you know, in the Ormond Multimedia Center, Tony, I know, such a kid, but Tony Walsh was set up this nightclub called Elevator. Do you remember it? It was like this big raving, like everyone off their face on ecstasy. But he had a few people from the theater companies around perform there. So we were one of them. So he had Anne Seagrave do her like trippy performance art stuff. She used to do these weird movement things. And there was a big Chief Random Chaos this guy used to cover himself in blue. And so these kind of weirdos would like turn up and do their weird art to these kids off their face on ecstasy. It was great crack. But we used to do Commedia for them. So we would do like a stint of about a half an hour set, if you like, of improvised stuff to drums, and we would come out and like play and whatever. We did that about 3 or 4 or 5 times, something like that. And he said, you really have to find a name for yourself. And I went, like, okay. And then I just walked down the quays, and there was the little rusted sign outside the Corn Exchange building, and I went, oh, that makes sense to me. Like the exchange of techniques that at the root of themselves are about our like brokenness, are like, you know, we'll work like a fucking dog but do anything for a cheap gag. So that's where it comes from, this idea of like, and even back in Chicago, the guys would be like, can I have more corn, please? Like the whole ethos of the style was like, you stay on stage until people start throwing things at you to leave. Or like there was a guy called Steve Pink who like wouldn't be killed. You couldn't kill him. He would like, like a, you know, you'd kind of shoot him and he'd like bounce bullets back, or slow down time and rewind it, or sew himself back together. And it's just ridiculous. So it's just totally silly, but completely committed. Wow. So I don't know. No one else would possibly get that from the name. They just, you know, it's such a dumb name now. You know, it was a couple of years later that I realized that in every town in England there was a corn exchange, and you know, it has this whole like relationship to the famine, and so I was like, oh god, okay, so oops. It's just totally ignorant.
It's funny though. I mean, you kind of like, I remember those times well, and there was a kind of generation of people coming out of college, and on one side, you know, I left college with Conor McPherson around that time, and it was kind of, you know, in some ways continuing on a kind of a different type of literature tradition, but it was that kind of, you know, text stuff. And then, like, what seems normal now in the theatrical mainstream, what you do, but back then wasn't at all. You know, there was kind of, there was a real sense of adventure, and, you know, from an Irish theatre going audience, even those within theatre going, what is this? You know, and a great excitement,
Yeah, great excitement. And actually, I mean, really my total ignorance and open-eyedness. I remember actually, it was John Cusack said this to me once. There were a bunch of us going around. He goes, "Oh yeah, you're an old soul. I'm an old soul. You're an old soul." And then they looked at me and he went, "You're brand new, Annie. Like you have never been here before," which is absolutely true. I'm like so wide-eyed. Everything shocks me, you know. And if I had known, I think how if I had known more about the dark side of Ireland, I don't know if I would have come. Like I knew enough about the American dark side not to go out to LA. Like
Yeah,
so that fear stopped me before. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah,
Um, yeah, from doing what I really wanted in a way.
yeah,
Uh, but it is true that like you know it wasn't hard to make an impact basically,
yeah.
but like I definitely you know the style is kind of amazing and even just the idea of totally embodied an approach that's from the body is still really unusual. I mean I did a little work in England and they were like where is this coming from, and it just you know like the tendency there is to spend like 3 weeks around a table. I can't imagine doing that. I really admire people who do, but I just don't know how. I have to get everybody up or I don't understand what's going on. Like if it's not in the body, it like doesn't hit me, you know? Um,
I mean,
so
I,
I don't know. I feel like I've been so lucky to have been so ignorant when I first came here. And then just to hit it at a time when the whole country was opening up into the nightmare that became the Celtic Tiger. But in the 90s, we as a generation were so lucky to be able to try things and to invest so fully in the work without really worrying so much about money. And then the money kind of came, like you know the arts we had to like whatever professionalize, and that made complete sense to me because you're supporting the work through the professionalization. And then oh you know of course you pay people properly, and so then it sort of grew so organically. But what I didn't see was the negative impact of the work. So I just remember capturing it and not really getting it, but and it wasn't that people were being negative but on purpose or something. But I just remember after we did this illegal version of Streetcar, which was like our first real foray with Tony Flynn playing Blanche Dubois. Turns out it's in Tennessee Williams' will that you're not supposed to cross dress. Like, so funny. So like he obviously knew he was onto something if it's in his will that you're not supposed to cross dress. But anyway, um, it was Patrick Mason came to see it, and he said something like, and I was like, "Oh, okay." And he goes, "You're really in this for the long haul, aren't you?" or something. And I was like, "Yes, sir, I sure am." And I fully expected an invitation into the Abbey, and never got one until these boys arrived. Like, never got one.
I mean, it's interesting.
So,
Yeah,
like,
I think
and maybe because I had the company, they were like, "She's got her company, who cares?" But actually, I don't think so. I think it was to do with maybe just my personality, maybe my foreignness, or the work itself being a bit wild in terms of the way it was made. I don't know, for whatever reason, like the powers that be at the time just wouldn't let me on the main stage.
but I think
And I really could have, but
yeah,
you know,
I think it's
like
interesting
I
though.
was certainly a strong enough director to have been able to hit
Yeah,
the main stage, but I just never made a piece
yeah.
for either the Abbey or the Gate.
And it's
I that's so
it's
weird.
fascinating that because you say the negative side of the work that because you did forge such an identity very very early, you know, with the company and with the work that it was kind of I mean like it's not to kind of just flash forward through 20 years of work,
Yeah,
but there was I mean I remember you know a play on two chairs you know back in the day and that was like you know a boutique piece, let's call it, you know, in relation to kind of scale. But Jesus, that was kind of that had a seminal effect on a lot of people around the industry at that time. And did you get a sense that you were kind of, you know, I always get that thing of kind of when you're traveling a road and you look behind you and it's kind of like, oh shit, where's everyone gone? You know, you're kind of forging new ground.
yeah. I mean, funny because Two Chairs was a piece that Michael did in college with Dominic and Mandy Hogan. And so we thought we'd do Two Chairs because we knew it already. So we didn't, we like revived it,
Yeah.
even though we were brand new. We were still so young, but it was like a show we thought we could do. Oh, there's a little friend. Hi. It was something we thought we could pull off for Fringe. And so we went, and I think we did 2 shows that year for Fringe. I think we did Big Bad Wolf, the illegal version of Albie's play, and then and Two Chairs as well, because we could, and it was something that we could pull off. Funny.
Yeah.
But I suppose I was driven more forward in those days, and it wasn't until the crash in 2009 and then the funding cuts soon to follow that I went, oh, holy fuck, I've moved to this little island in the middle of the Atlantic. What am I gonna do? And that was a really big moment to
Before we get that, sorry, and just to kind of go back, because like you go through Lolita, Foley, Don Siegel, there was work, but the aesthetic was kind of really interesting, because it was certainly this kind of hybrid space, and you were also surprising your own audiences. I remember going to see some of your shows, you kind of going, oh, that doesn't look like a Corn Exchange show. It's like they were kind of messing around.
Yeah.
And that was...
And actually, yeah, because it's funny, I think all the way along, the style is so full on, and it comes like as a package deal. It wants to be underlit with makeup, with percussion. It's got a whole bunch of things it wants to be. It doesn't suit everything. It's, I remember at the end of the run of Dublin by Lamplight, like we did this world tour practically, and this little young one up at the back of the house in London, very last show, she's like 18, says, that was really good, but like they attributed the same importance to every moment. And I went, she's right. If everything is urgent, then nothing is urgent. So, but all along we were doing diversions from that. So Two Chairs, The Seagull, Foley, which is a really beautiful lyrical piece. So it was, but what really is at the core of my work is really about embodied presence with whatever it is. So it's not about it's not good for branding though. I've learned, the audiences would have been, and the Arts Council too, would have been happier if the only thing we did was the style, because it looks like this, or like take a company like Pop Baby, like they're so good at branding, where they're like, the shows have great diversity, but that you're going to go see, that there's probably going to be a like glitter curtain or something. There's going to be glitter, if you're going to see something by Pop Baby, but and a kick to the gut or whatever. But with my work, I wanted to explore a whole range of things, not just through the brash intensity of commedia, but also to soften and use the same kind of application physically, but in a more feminine way, or in a softer way, or a more nuanced way. And of course, as I got older and older, that became more and more my interest. And I still like, and not, look, if you're going to make a play every goddamn year, like you're going to have ones that really hit the mark and ones that don't hit the mark. But hopefully, like each one of them definitely opened up something in the work for me. Like there was always like a really important teaching about like, oh, we could do this with this, or, oh, it could lend itself this way, or this isn't as strong a narrative as I thought it would be, or, but like, so it's always about looking for what is the intention of the piece, and how can we maneuver everyone's work, like from the designers through the cast, through the staging, through everything, to kind of channel that energy to the audience. And, you're not always going to get there for all kinds of reasons. It might be the writing isn't good enough, and it's good enough is such a boring way to put it, but the writing may not allow for that experience to really fully take something like The Misfits, like such an interesting project on so many levels, but like the text is just really not strong. It's just not strong enough. So it's not to say, and I guess I wanted to explore something really internal as opposed to really external. So that combination of what I wanted to explore with a text that's so problematic, ended up being a really weird show that not everyone's going to like, but like I quite liked it in the end, but it was definitely really odd, you know. And I think it meant, and this is kind of going back to what you were, I think, alluding to earlier, the kind of mystery of what is a corn exchange show, or this sort of audience expectation, you know. And I do feel like I've disappointed people along, you know, like kind of key audience, like when we did Happy Days by Beckett in 2010 with wonderful Clara Simpson. She was really excellent, and Joe Van Eyck designed it, and it was maybe in the end a little bit too classical. You know, that's really Joe. I think I probably let Joe be too Joe or something like that for the piece to have the dirtiness it wanted to have or something. But I think people expected me to do something that was more commedia or something. I don't know, but
it's interesting, Annie. Sorry, just when you're saying that, because looking through your work, I mean, I think, not that it's kind of tale of two halves, but I mean, I think there's a really, you mentioned there about kind of maturing into your work, and that kind of very interesting that what you were saying there about age, but also kind of being in Ireland over a stretch of time, because I do think, you know, if you look at something like, for me, looking back at, and you know, I think I've seen most of your work, but the kind of around like Free Fall, which like was a stunning kind of piece of work, and an into Man of Valor. You know, there was kind of, to me, there was something happened that, I mean, I'm being flippant, but like there seems to be kind of the aesthetic over the decade since, is like near that the kind of the comedian mask has gone on the inside, and I mean that as a compliment, that it's kind of like that it's feigned naturalism. Do you know what I mean? That it's not, but it's kind of, the outside might look more naturalistic, but the method or the process seems to be very much still there.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, I would still begin with a lot of that training, for sure. The other thing is the funding. So, I mean, what happened after Free Fall? Like, Free Fall was the first time I actually went to David Parnell at the time and went, I know how to work now. I know how to work. Like, I really do. So it was such an exciting feeling to know, this is how I begin with this kind of yoga practice, this kind of rigor, and I know what I need. And I really felt at the time that it was really, really an efficient way of working. Like, I need not huge, extensive development time with actors, but a little bit of it. And I need a good bit of time with honing the writing, and then dipping in, like a development process that allows for like dipping in to check. And then the final kind of sprint toward production. It's almost like doing it sort of, you know, I'm always envious of filmmakers with their editing process, you know, because we only get like 3 previews or whatever. You're like, oh fuck, okay, well, this is it. Here we go. You know, but after Free Fall, we got cut in half. And so after that, I couldn't do the work that the company was really built for. So I couldn't do any of the ensemble work because I couldn't afford to pay an ensemble, period, to make anything original. So Man of Valor happened. Well, with Happy Days, I thought, well, I could do Happy Days. I can afford 2 actors. I can't afford to make anything up, but here we go. So we did that, and it was okay. It was probably better than okay, but it didn't quite, you know, to follow up Free Fall with Happy Days wasn't, you know, that exciting. But I fell into a kind of place where I was trying to stay true to my artistic aspiration and what the kind of core of the work of the company was, but at the same time, really be responsible with the money and try to keep that grant going. But as it was, we had huge restrictions on how we were allowed to spend the money, you know, absolutely not on core costs, not on all of this stuff, fine. So we got really, really, really narrow, really slender. And we made our organization work in such a way where, like, we had like no office rent, like no, like it was so tiny what we were spending on our core costs. Like it was really just paying me and then one other person twice a week, and that was it. So it was pretty slender. But anyway, but in terms of what the output was, you know, Man of Valor came out of Paul Reed completely, but it also came out of the fact that we couldn't hire an ensemble. We could pay him to engage with us. And same with A Girl Is a Half-Formed Thing, which was, I think, as well, like a really important part of our repertoire.
Yeah.
You know, we could afford it. And then a lot of the other work, which I still loved making, and I'm so grateful that I got to make pieces like Desire Under the Elms it's a great text. It was, you know, I've always felt that those classic plays, and I would feel the same about like O'Casey, you know, they lend itself to that kind of, if not full commedia, like something informed by that kind of embodiment. I don't know if you ever saw Mud years ago.
I did, yeah.
But Mud is a play that hardly anyone saw, but by Maria Irene Fornes, who's a really important American playwright that like no one's heard of. But that was a piece we did really early that was really like, this is what I want to explore. This, again, internal mask, like very full performance energy, but not fully in the style, you know. So some of that work was more like Mud.
Yeah.
And then some of it, you know, like we tried this Ingmar Bergman piece that didn't really work for a whole number of reasons. But part of it was that I wasn't allowed to do my own adaptation. I had to follow the adaptation that was already written, which was fine. But it was fine. Look, I loved getting into Ingmar Bergman's work. Holy God, what a character. It was such a joy. And it was a fun piece to make and blah, blah. But part of that was the onus and the importance with which, like, you've got to deliver a show every year, and that stringent, you know, I can't think of hardly any filmmaker makes a film a year. Maybe Woody Allen did for a while, but you know, so and I would have always tried to argue for development and longevity, and you know, for the sake of longevity, and this arts grant piece that they're doing now is really supposed to be doing that, in the sense that you know, it's to allow a company to kind of go quiet and then come back up again, you know. So the principle is, well, they may not fund you every year, they may, you know, only give you a little bit, and then you come back with a bigger piece, which I actually think is a really, really, really healthy way forward. But the problem is when they cut someone to zero, then that's a really big signal for a start, a really big sign about where they value you. But also, how are you meant to develop anything, you know? So
yeah, I mean, I think before we go there, I think I just want to talk about those two pieces, because in some bizarre way, when I was thinking about talking to you today, I was kind of, I really see them in some bizarre way as companion pieces. A Girl Is a Half-Formed Thing and Man of Valor, because I think there's it's like the outside inside in a way, and and the male female obviously, but also the sense of like Man of Valor was extraordinary, and you know, it kind of, to me, encapsulated in one human the whole company, in a way. He went, "Feck it, I can't afford to hire them all. Paul will do them all," you know.
Yeah.
But with A Girl Is a Half-Formed Thing, I mean, you adapted that yourself, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that was a stunning piece of work, but very visceral in its containment, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And I think that was such an interesting thing to see you really let the text, you know, free.
Yeah, that's right.
And by that, it was horrific, you know.
Yeah.
I went to that kind of going, okay, you know, it's going to be, I don't mean covered, but it's going to be elucidated within kind of some physical, it'll be there. The physical will be there to protect us within the horror, but no.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, again, like, so much of it is to do with like really listening for what the intention of the piece is, right? So with Man of Valor, that was a piece we invented with Paul, obviously. And very soon it was sort of looking at him as a creature, as a kind of creative artist, to go, okay, what he does is so particular, and it's so close to graphic novels, like how he improvises on stage. Whenever he got up in the style, he was always like sprouting blades from his hands or wings out of his back and flying over the city. And all of us would just sit back agog and watch him just basically play out his childhood, you know, boy kind of Thor, whatever, you know, these kind of hero stories. So we were very much following that hero journey in the sense of the narrative, what the narrative would be, and what would be the, you know, inciting incident and all this kind of stuff, you know. What is that knock on the door and what happens to him? And that was such an interesting thing to find the narrative. But it was very much from the kind of essence of Paul Reed and his talent being so connected to graphic novels and cartoon and drawing. So he's a guy who is like, he draws these extraordinary cartoons of like, I don't know, like a guy sinking into a coffee cup. I can't even describe it really, but it's exactly what he does on stage. It's really weird. It's the same exact talent that goes to drawing and in the body. It's bizarre. He's super weird. But so it was very much about channeling that. And that's partly why it became that kind of male genre piece. Whereas with A Girl Is a Half-Formed Thing, it's really a voice. And it's the voice of this girl speaking beyond the grave to her brother. And it struck me when I read it that it wanted to be spoken. So its essence was not a visual one. It was an aural one. It was a vocal one. And partly too, you know, I was all on for a much more physical, or rather demonstratively physical performance, because that's what I would usually, you know, that's sort of my comfort zone too. But it was actually Aoife Duffin who was going, no, I'm not going to do any accents, because the book is full of accents, you know, like the mother's from the north and the grandfather's from the north, and other people are from definitely the west, and then Dublin and blah, blah. And Eve was like, no. And it was her, and again, weirdly following the performer, like Paul, it was following her artistic sensibility as a kind of like slightly masochistic, sadomasochistic, raw, like stripped back, like no skin, no protection. You know, this kind of rawness that Aoife does is so extraordinary. You know, so it was sort of me looking at, and I'm sort of making this up as I go along slightly, but it makes me think about like working with someone like Mark O'Halloran, or, you know, what I tend to have done over the years is look at who's in the room, like who have I got, and what do they? Hi, Stanley. Do you want to go back outside? Hold on, I'm just going to let him out. Go on. Yeah, go on. He's out there. But you know, partly because we don't have the luxury of like the whole fucking film board behind you or something to like get the perfect person, if that even exists in the thing. It's like, how do you look at the talent in front of you and really use what they can do? I remember once asking Mark to do this mimey thing in one of the shows, and he was like, Annie, I can't do that. Like, it's not in me to do that. Don't ask me to fucking like make a fucking pour or something. Like, you know, I'm like, okay, good. Well, what can you do? And well, turns out he can do an awful lot. And he's like this kind of like extraordinary improviser, and of course writer now and everything. But so yeah, like looking at Man of Valor and Girl, the identity of those people are so wrapped up in the performers of them.
Well, I think that's fascinating, though.
The joy of following that.
This is not really interesting. I find it fascinating for, you know, you know, a non-practitioner of your style looking in, you would think that it would be the complete opposite. Do you know what I mean? You would think that it you know, and I think that's brilliant. The fact that, but when you strip it all down, it is yeah, that kind of really pure director-actor relationship is to try and kind of draw and meld the actor the actor themselves with the character, with the performance, and that's and I
Yeah.
think that's kind of fascinating watching the journey of not just your work but your developing style, and I think that's, I mean, you mentioned, you know, but you're right, but sorry, among all that though, you're kind of, you know, your funding gone, you know, and you know, both from a obviously a moralistic, or not moralistic, sorry, a morale, or you know, a confidence place, a purely financial place, about what next. And then, you know, on the same track as that, you're hitting the Abbey stage, you know, with Dublin by Light, you know, I just said in this kind of natural home, and then, you know, most recently the fallout of Second Republic. I mean, obviously there's other shows in between that, but I have two questions in relation to that. One is more to do with the work, and one is more to do with kind of how do you keep a company or a kind of an art going, you know, in those type of conditions. But the first one I'll ask is yourself and Michael. How does that dynamic work? I mean, obviously, you know, you're married, you know, you're family, and you have been each other's, you know, touchstones artistically, you know, for 2 decades.
Yeah.
Or
3 nearly. I mean, I know him 30 years.
Yeah, 3 decades. Yeah.
I don't know. It ain't pretty. I don't recommend it. I don't know. Like, he's he's a terribly nice man is what I will say, really, and that and a very sane man. So for all the madness of doing the work, and it does get crazy. Like, what we all do is like mental, you know.
Yeah.
We've no guarantee it's going to work. You don't really know what you're up to, even if you've prepared really, really well. Anything could happen, all of that. And the fear that comes with all that, you know. But tough to work with your husband like that. Really foolish. You know, I was begging him to find a different director for Fall of the Second Republic. I was full on going, I do not want to work with you ever again. Like, let's stop, you know, because it went beyond, like, not in front of the children. Because I think what happens over a long period of time is that one's own sense of failure gets wrapped up with this other person. So, and I find, like, it's very hard for my psyche and his too, presumably, to separate, like, where have I failed, or where's my blindness? You know, it's so funny to listen to you talk about, like, you know, an audience coming in and wanting to connect the dots between these pieces, say, you know, or the polar opposites of Girl and Man of Valor. But for me, they're not that far away at all. I'm just facilitating the piece through a very similar, with very similar techniques, actually, weirdly. But so I don't know. It's a mess.
Good mess though. It works.
Well, it works sometimes, but it's you know.
Yeah.
If I had more money, I would be in lots of therapy. And so would he.
Yeah. Going to, I mean, they're two very, as I said, arriving in and getting to, you know, do Dublin by Lamplight in the Abbey, and then most recently,
that was wonderful.
Yeah, and it kind of fit, you know, completely. And most recently, and actually, you know, we were speaking beforehand, just got under the wire pre-pandemic, was the fall of the Second Republic, and I think, you know, to make it in the Abbey, is a fantastic thing at any time. But I think particularly with you, as you talk about your journey there and talk about your work, it must have been a phenomenal thing to kind of get to see your work bloom up.
Oh, yeah. Well, it was a long wait, you know, but so it was my first time making anything in that rehearsal room. I mean, we did Dublin by Lamplight before, obviously, and it was such a joy to bring it there. And this was it was a tricky piece. It was also very much what Michael wanted to do, in a way. Like, he wanted to do this piece set in the 70s. It was originally all set in Dáil Éireann. And I was saying, this is the dumbest idea I've ever heard in my life. Like, I don't know the 70s. You don't know, your parents know the 70s, but like, only people, really old people, are going to have any idea what you're talking about. And also, it was almost an all-male white cast. I thought, I can't do a piece about a bunch of men talking about Irish politics. Like, if this is really what you want to do, go work with someone else, please. Like, it'd be much better for our marriage if you did it anyway. So I spent so much of the process resisting it wasn't very fun in that way at all. But also questioning, well, okay, well, maybe I could do it if there's a female protagonist, or if, so we invented Emer Hackett. And it's really, again, because Michael's kind of mad kindness over everything. I don't know, he's like, okay, well, we'll do it like this then. And I was like, you mean I still have to do your dumb play? It's so funny. But I was like kicking and screaming the whole time, essentially. But I did, and, you know, right up into rehearsals, you know, the play wasn't finished. You know, we would have these read-throughs where like everyone would be like reading the play going, okay. And Michael would be in the corner going, like having a great time laughing. I'm like, you're the only one laughing. No one else is laughing. There's a problem here. So anyway, one person panics and the other person goes, it'll be fine. Isn't that what happens in a marriage? You know, and then those roles switch.
Yeah, most of the time,
So,
you know, not necessarily in plays, just generally. I think that's the way.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm the one who goes, it'll never work. Oh my God, but this. What, you know, this isn't a good joke or whatever, you know. So I'm the one who panics, and then he goes, it'll be fine.
Yeah.
So it's hard. It's fucking really insane, actually, I think, mad. So I hope I never do it again. I'd love to do Free Fall again. I'd love to revisit Free Fall, but I'm not sure I have it in me to work with him again. But also, what you learn as well is that my sensibilities are so different. Like the work that I proposed to do for the Arts Council was much more to do with an investigation into female experience, into what happens to women when they're on the threshold, what happens to, and what would be a way in which you could use a female kind of consciousness. Like, is there a difference even, or is there a difference just by virtue of the fact that we go through different physical changes, or we have different biological clocks? So we have a secular, or, you know, monthly cycle. You guys are on a daily cycle. You rise in the morning and, you know, you're with the sun. You know what I mean? So I'm like really interested in facilitating stories about women and for women and by women. So I proposed this big program of work with Booker Prize winning female authors all the way to really exciting young female Irish performance company. And I don't know, the Arts Council didn't find it compelling enough to fund at all. And I went, wow, okay. But I don't know, I suspect that part of the, I can't really get my head around it, except that I do believe them kind of when they say that they just simply didn't allot enough money for this group. Yeah. So we were up against Dead Center and Anu, who are like on fire at the moment, but also Anne Clark and Pop Baby, and, you know, we've been going for so long, I don't know. So, and so there is that. They didn't ring fence enough money. Like, they are not lying to me when they say that. But I do think if they had given me 30 grand or something to just, the idea of keeping going at all.
Yeah.
So, you know,
I mean, where you're at now, as I say, we're all in a holding position, but you are in that without a pandemic. You know what I mean? Within that.
Yeah. I like to think I had about a 6-month start. I'm 6 months ahead of everybody else, and going, oh my God, what will happen now? Yeah. Into the unknown. Yeah, and I really don't know. I mean, I think part of me was really looking for a change anyway, and I was finding the obligation to come up with and deliver a show every year, while it was a great gift, and I'm so grateful that I got to do that. I wasn't always happy with, it's to do with support, really, like really supporting the work. So I got to shadow Lenny on Normal People, and watch him work and watch the whole thing. And like the amount of people around giving their absolute expert advice, contributing at this very, very high level, and the amount of support behind them, like the mountain of support that is there to facilitate a piece like Normal People, is like literally awesome. And it's something that no one in the theater can possibly, it's just not in any way comparable. And partly because it's not in any way comparable in terms of its value. Like, it just isn't as valuable in the world, period. Like, that's what it is. Like, it isn't as valued, and it isn't, you know, so whereas the theater can still like be, you know, I'm still a theater animal right to my bones. I was becoming more and more frustrated by the feeling that I couldn't support the process as much as I really wanted to with a bigger cast, say, like with the Seagull and Dublin Theatre Festival. Now, Dublin Theatre Festival came on board and half funded it. So it wasn't just our smaller grant. They paid for some of it. But the support is not just in the delivery, it's in all of that, the years that it takes to kind of build up towards production, if you like. And I guess the older you get, the more discerning you get, and the more your eyes are open, and the more you know what's going to go wrong. you know that feeling of like, you're like, you can read a script and you go, yeah, well, these things are problematic, or this thing is really problematic. And if you don't address that thing,
yeah,
it is going to come and bite you right in the ass. I mean, Lenny was talking to you about Room and building the set.
yeah.
I think it's such a great story. And so for those of you who haven't heard it, go listen to Lenny. Michael thinks it's the best interview he's ever done, actually, Mark. You know, it's a real compliment to you. He's just, it's a really beautiful interview. But he talks about like they were trying to find the proportions for the actual room to shoot in, and this is for the listeners. And anyway, they built this whole structure, and they went in, and he knew immediately that it was too big, and he had to start over and you know, scrap that. And you know, that's what you want in your director. You want the guy to walk in and go, it all has to go. That's what you really want. Now, sometimes in theater, that is really tough. Those, like, to make calls like that are really hard, because we you know, we're going to open in a few weeks. Like, so, but you know, if you have to make a really, really hard call, like you've made a terrible casting decision, or like if you have to find a way to either live with it and move things around, or a terrible design choice, or something's really wrong with the set. I mean, here, you know, I had a set once that where the designer just raised it up a bit, just made it bigger in the model, and I didn't really notice. But when we got to the theater, it was really a big deal, and it became too big. And we both realized afterwards we shouldn't have raised it. But in a model size, you know, and it was late-ish on in the process, that my eye wasn't quick enough to go, oh no, let's not raise it, you know. So it's these little things. But what I'm really pointing to is, like, you get sharper and sharper as the maker, but the support has been less and less and less and less. Yeah. So we've needed to pay everyone more and more and more and more. And it's just been like less support, less support, less support, yeah. less support. So it's a really unhappy way to work.
Yeah, but I think as well, and you said something I think is kind of crucial there as well, though, that sometimes all eyes are on the Arts Council, but in a way the Arts Council can only give what they're given. Do you know what I mean? So
well, I know. You've got to go higher than them. And that's what I mean about value. And that's my sort of, oh my God, I moved to a tiny island in the middle of the Atlantic piece that really doesn't give a shit. Like, so we have a minister who's, you know, given, what is it, 20 grand is the latest offering to the whole arts sector. I mean, is that some sort of sick joke or something like that? You couldn't make a play for 20 grand, you know, like you could barely do a piece of like development for 20 grand. You know, that's what 20 grand buys you, is a few weeks of development.
Yeah, but I think you're right, and I think you're on something. But I think as well, like even at that table, like our minister has to go to another minister to kind of So I think it's not. It's very easy to kind of personalize these into different steps of the stairs. But it's
oh no, I wouldn't be blaming. I mean, like I genuinely believe the Arts Council when they say, look, we really didn't have enough money, and we really don't want to lose the Corn Exchange completely, and we really do want you to apply again. But at the same time, their rules are, but we don't want you to have any kind of salary, and we don't want you. And I'm like, well, what you're asking me to do is the same work or more work for about a fifth of the money, maybe, or a third of the money, or whatever. And I don't know if I have it in me to do that. I don't know what else I could possibly do with myself. But there's all kinds of there's all sorts of costs if you go to zero. Like the last time we were cut, it was a 48% cut, which is massive. And it sort of killed the artistic vision of the company, is what it killed. It killed the capacity to deliver the vision. And so I really, I've still managed to make a few pieces of decent work in the last 10 years, but I knew it was so skin of the teeth, and I knew I had to deliver every year. I couldn't have a year where I was like, okay, I'm going to develop these things, and then.
I won't keep you much longer, because I could talk to you literally for hours, but just to finish off, I suppose going back to that kind of young girl kind of growing up in Chicago, and now as we are all sitting here in a pandemic in Dublin, that's saying beyond the whole rigor of trying to make ends meet and make work, but that every time I talk to you, every time I see you, that kind of joy still remains, though. That kind of quest for that joy. That's it, Fever. And you started acting again recently when they did a Dead Center show a couple of years ago.
Yeah, that was so much fun. Yeah. And then I cast myself in Nora, which was really interesting experience. But I learned from that I can't really act in something that I'm for Corn Exchange. It just doesn't work, because I'm ultimately responsible for the whole thing. So you can't be an actor and shoulder the responsibility for the piece unless you're doing a film, because you can edit, but you can't do it, I don't think, on the stage. Mind you, Bush does it. Bush is in all of his work.
Yes.
Which means, but that simply means that he doesn't know what the work is, really, because it means he doesn't, the hell of sitting in among the public is such a kind of terrifying eye-opener, and you learn so much about those pieces in preview, where people looking at their watch, where are they shifting around. You're like, okay, got it, so I don't know, we're talking about something about aspiration. So acting, I don't know if I'm not practiced as an actor enough to be any good at it, is the truth. I might have been really good as a young one, but my voice was never that strong, or I had kind of paranoid, kind of fear around the voice. But really, I'm not that practiced. So,
Was it bizarre seeing yourself recently on television?
With Bachelor's Rock. Yeah. Well, I couldn't bring myself to really watch it, but one of my kids said, their friend, look what I found on the TV, and took a still from it. No, I mean, I would love to work with Louise Lowe, say, for example, or I'd love to perform in one of her shows. So I'd love to be a performer and to move. I'd love that. But I still am really passionate. Where my real passion lies is really around this sense of embodiment and the power of our presence to transform, and the power that these media, not just theater, but I'm an aspiring filmmaker at 50, just a bit sad, but sure. Oh well. I've been a little busy with the theater for all these years, so we'll see if I have the balls to actually make that happen. I'm trying, but it's not easy to start at this age where you've got this discernment, and such expectation. It's the great thing about just doing it when you're younger is that it doesn't really fucking matter. You just do it, and you're not, so. But I do believe in the medicine of it. I believe that when we really connect to a performer, that it can really be very, very powerful. And of course, the live form is, I don't really think the Zoom thing is that exciting as an answer to what do we do with our theater. But I do a yoga class live online, and it is different to take the class live, to know that it's live, to know that everyone's, doing this live, as opposed to recording. So there is something to it, but I also think that even for film, like what all of those all those mountains of money are there to support is what they're all looking at is for beautiful Paul Mescal or Daisy or whoever the actor is, to really be channeling the germ of that piece fully, right from their toes to their fingertips. It doesn't mean they have to be wah, you know. To me, it's the same thing. It doesn't. If it's commedia, it's just bigger. If you're on stage, your audience is further away, so you've got to project outward. But if your audience is right next to you, then you don't need to be wildly, you don't need to push anything. You can just open the door and let them in. So it's the same acting muscle to me. So I hope I'm able to continue. But for sure, part of me, like everyone, is thinking, what will I be when I grow up? And, you know, what else could I do? And, you know, so, and I don't know whether I'll ever be, the really scary thing is that I don't know if I'll ever be in a position of support the way I have been for the last 20 years with Corn Exchange. I don't know if I'll ever get that back, or even the status that brings in terms of like, to, you know, hold the keys to unlock, to be the person hiring everyone, essentially, to have the power to hire everyone is a really privileged, it's a really, really, really privileged place to get to make something.
Yeah.
And so I hope I'll be able to do that again.
Well, so do we, Annie. So do we. Come on, listen, thanks a million for taking part in this. You've been a joy to chat to. And thanks for all your shows, and I look forward to many, 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 many more.
Thank you, my dear.
And your movies.
Yeah, well, why not, right? So yeah, I want to make a film set in Dublin Theatre. So
wow,
that's what I'm working on. So, yeah.
Thanks a million.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.